Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy el tema es cómo nosotros podemos combinar todos los elementos que nosotros hablamos durante los últimos días, cómo combinamos estos elementos en una mejor práctica para mejorar nuestra fluidez. Eso es el tema de hoy. So, hello again from Medellín. Today going to talk briefly about how we can now combine these elements that we've been talking about over the last few days, how we can combine these into something practical to help us improve our fluency. So let's think about that. So we've looked at being reflective on how we're progressing in what we're doing, looking at it perhaps from another perspective to be a bit more honest with ourselves about where we could improve. We've tried to simplify that by going back to one or two particular problems, putting them into a very specific context, and trying to engineer some new dialogue perhaps that we can use to help us in those situations, but also to help us correct the problems we've had, maybe improve the vocabulary, improve our expression. And then lastly, yesterday we looked at, when can we practice this? So hopefully some of those ideas will give you a new way to get more momentum back into your practice. But ultimately, that's the thing, we have to practice. Now ideally, we want to be having those conversations that we need to have for those points we need to get better with the type of people we normally would talk to about that. So we want to have those conversations in those situations, in those locations, so we can practice for real with those groups of people. But sometimes that's not always practical. So the next best way I found, and something I've used with some success with a lot of my students, is to do a reading. Now with the modern technology at our control, I personally find the Chat GPT very helpful for this type of exercise. With a very small amount of direction on your part, you can quite easily get paragraphs or dialogues for you to read. And you can be quite specific and request that it includes particular elements. So you can ask it to include types of words or word sounds that you have problems with, perhaps. Things like that. So I'm going to share with you a dialogue piece that I used with one of my students today. In order to get the ChatGPT to write this, all I really had to ask it was, I'm looking for a piece that discusses the importance of and ways to simplify complex ideas to improve our communication when we're sharing those ideas with other people. So just with that short kind of description of the kind of thing I'd like, I got about 6 or so paragraphs, which I've then been able to use with great effect with my student today. So shout out to Samuel. Now, one of the things I was practicing in the reading today, and this is another thing I'd encourage you to use the readings for, is when you've familiarised yourself with the text, have a think about your audience, who's going to listen to this, how are they best going to understand what you're trying to say. And remember what we spoke about in an earlier video about the power of pauses. Think carefully about your tempo of speech and look at how you can use pauses to improve your expression without having to add in any particularly complicated change of the tone of your voice. So I'm going to read you out these paragraphs today. I'll include the text in the description so you can read it through later. But when you're listening to this, have a think about, again, where I'm pausing, and notice that really that's going to be more or less the only thing I'm using to add expression into my reading. And see how effective that is. So we'll give this a go. simplifying complex ideas for clear communication. In an increasingly information-driven world, the ability to communicate complex ideas in a simple and clear way has become a valuable skill. At the heart of this challenge lies the concept of distillation, taking something intricate and breaking it down into its core elements. By doing so, you give your audience a more accessible entry point into the subject. Rather than overwhelming with detail, you guide them through a narrative that highlights the most important points. Simplicity in this context isn't about dumbing down the content, but rather about focusing on clarity and precision. One effective technique for simplifying complexity is to identify a central theme or idea and build around it. Imagine you're explaining a complicated piece of technology. Instead of starting with the technical specifications, you first identify the problem it solves or the benefit it offers. This shifts the focus to something tangible, allowing your audience to grasp its importance before diving into the details. The technical information can be introduced later, once the core idea is understood. Visual metaphors and analogies also play a powerful role in simplifying communication. Humans are hardwired to understand stories and comparisons, so by framing a complex idea in familiar terms, you make it more relatable. For example, you might compare a complex algorithm to a recipe, with each step building towards a specific outcome. This helps your audience bridge the gap between the abstract and the familiar, enabling them to understand faster. Additionally, breaking ideas into digestible chunks is essential. When explaining something complicated, there's no need to overload the listener with too much information at once. Instead, present the idea step by step, ensuring that each layer is fully grasped before moving on to the next. This gradual unfolding of complexity prevents confusion and fosters a deeper understanding. Finally, an often overlooked element of simplifying ideas is the speaker's tone and delivery. Enthusiasm, combined with an ability to speak clearly and confidently, makes even the most abstract subjects more engaging. A confident speaker knows how to use pauses, vocal emphasis, and varied tone to draw attention to key points, making the overall message feel compelling rather than overwhelming. Well, there we are. I hope you find that an interesting reading. And I hope that's shown you another way you can make good use of our modern technology to give you useful material to practice with. I find this particularly very helpful. Clearly, you have to have a bit of input by thinking clearly about what you would like the AI to write about. But what you get back, I think you can see, is quite a useful piece of writing, or indeed reading. So I hope you find this one useful. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre. But for now, from Medellin, we'll say cheerio.